Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. My name is Amri Johnson, your host. Season 3 of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast will be focused on opening up dialogue about a way forward in the diversity and inclusion space that's focused more on who we are than what we ascribe to one another. It will be about shifting patterns and practices we've come to adhere to in the space, examining them with fresh eyes in the current climate, about principles the work has revolved around and why and what principles we might need to consider anew, about exploring our thinking, how we are making meaning of our workplaces and the world around us in the most curious ways we can, how we listen with skill, openly learn, create the conditions that allow colleagues to know they matter. Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. This is Amri Johnson, your host, and I'm excited today to have Ingrid Hu Dahl, who is an extraordinary human being who has written an awesome book, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about Ingrid's really dynamic experience on the planet that's been around, and anything else that comes up, because her book has so much content. I read it in total, and I'm really excited to dig in. So Ingrid, welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast.
Thanks, Amri. I'm truly honored to be here with you today.
We're glad to have you. Ingrid, we always ask all of our guests 2 questions at the beginning. And the first one is a favorite song or movie that you go to over and over again.
Ooh, that's a good one. Since we'll probably touch on my family and childhood a bit, I would say that what comes immediately to mind is my mom's favorite American movie, It's a Wonderful Life, and To Kill a Mockingbird was mine and my father's. It's a really powerful film and book. Oh my gosh, also by a young woman. Favorite songs, similarly related to family, the Bee Gees, More Than a Woman, had a lot to do and keeps playing randomly in times where I'm thinking about my mom, may she rest in power. And more about my wife and our love, I think of Beach House, the song Take Care. One of my favorites, very like sweet and vulnerable, and where humans connect and take care of one another.
Can you do the falsetto Bee Gees? Are you that kind of vocalist?
If I have maybe a little liquid courage, and I'll just go for it. But that's my answer to that.
All right, I'll take that one. So Ingrid, tell us about your journey professionally. What brought you to what you do now, and what was the pathway that you took to get there?
It's a great question, and I'd say a lot of it came from doing my graduate practicum, which you read about, with the rock and roll camp for girls in Portland, Oregon, where I noticed that about 30% of the individuals who'd be coming to camp, and there were 3 week-long back-to-back sessions, were multiracial. I had never seen such a high amount of folks who are multiracial, mixed race, biracial, coming in that age group. And I was really excited to create an experience that would help give language to what was going on within like what we call, I guess today, systems of oppression. And I found that when I went to Rutgers University as an undergraduate student and then continuing on as a grad student, I had this new language and access to Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Adrian Piper, which I know you are a fan of as well. And that exposure felt so late to me that I wanted to give that to 8 to 18-year-olds in this completely different area of the US I had at the time never been in. And I'd say that kind of experimentation, that care for connection and social justice and giving back and information really has carried out throughout my career across, youth media and being a program officer and trying to document these best practices that were happening in these like media focused after school programs nationally across the US and also globally. And then it continued to evolve into like learning and development and leadership development. How do we create inclusive leaders and people who have high emotional intelligence? And the recognition that all of us have triggers and things that don't feel good as adults, but we have so much opportunity to dig into learning more about ourselves and what's getting in the way of deepening the connection with the people we care about and the people we get the opportunity to work with. So that's where you find me today as a leadership coach and consultant and the author of this memoir. I wasn't planning to write a book, but it's a beautiful laying bare of who I am and why I've become this woman in leadership that everyone gets to know. Because people are like, why didn't you write a leadership book? I'm like, this is because it starts at the epicenter. It starts in laying bare and sharing who you are.
Sure, sure. And that's not always a comfortable place.
No, it is.
I can imagine you talk about a lot of really personal experiences that you went through, a lot around your, you know, multiple identities, which we
Mm,
all have. All of us have this kind of varied connections or varied combinations and mixtures of who we are. And one thing that you use this term, and I'm going to go right into the mixed race conversation. I don't know how much you know about my kind of exploration of race over the past couple years. Is I've been engaging with a lot of people around this topic, particularly around what race is and what race isn't.
mm,
You use the term Hoppa kid,
mm.
and it was curious to me, at what point in your life did you come to think about yourself as mixed race?
Yeah, I probably wasn't very young. So when I think about when I realized I knew I was an other, I knew I was different the whole time growing up, but referencing myself as mixed race, multiracial, Hapa, which comes from the Hawaiian term Hapa Haole, wasn't until college when I learned
Mm,
more about those terms. And of course, Hapa Haole also kind of reiterates like the sort of white barbarian that comes in and generates mixed Asian, mixed race children, which also has a really difficult history globally around the mixedness. And we could get into that if you'd like, but I didn't necessarily identify with that history, but I thought that, you know what, that term was something that I felt very akin to and gravitated towards in college and beyond. Even when my films, towards the end, there's a sign above a door where we're kind of panning back out, and you hear the Brad Pony song "Covers" come on, which is a band I was in, and it says Hoppa Club. And this film, which was part of the Queer Women of Media Arts project in San Francisco, had quite a large film screening. And folks came to me who were both Asian and multiracial asking, does that club exist? So clearly there was a need, and people were trying to figure out, how do I find community with other people who are Hapa or identify as multiracial?
yeah. Would you, and this is where when the conversation about mixed race, third culture kids, that's how I've
Mm,
seen my son is what you would call, I'm in the process of moving away from even the notion of race. I think it's a
mm,
fiction. I don't think it's real.
mm,
So to continue in that conversation with race, racism is always behind it. And my
mm-hmm,
belief
mm-hmm.
is that if we want to transcend racism, we have to transcend race. That's a
Oh,
belief
yeah.
that I'm developing from talking to a few different authors and scholars. But think about this notion of a mixed culture and then a third culture. So you have a father who is racialized as white, the mother
Mm-hmm.
who's racialized as Chinese or Asian, whatever, how one wants to put a racial category around it. And I use air quotes a lot around that notion.
Okay.
And so to me, that's third culture. My son, for example, is really fourth culture. I'm
Mhm.
American. His mother was born in Switzerland to Spanish parents, but was really, acculturated in the French speaking part of Switzerland, and we live in the German speaking part. So that's a fourth, I call him almost like a fourth culture kid because
Mm.
he's integrating all these things. in first grade, this was in your book, and it happened both two times. It was in first grade, you were called a half piece of something that wasn't very nice that starts with an S and an H and ends with a T and has other things in
Yep.
between. That happened two times. One had happened to from a boy, older boy, who was racialized as white. And then later you got it from another boy that was
As
at
Asian.
10 years old, about 4 or 5 years later for you, that was racialized as Asian. Did these two similar insults occur the same to you, or did those two things have a different impact when you heard them from one person versus the other?
It's a great question. I was pretty surprised. In the book, I'm like, did this Asian brother just say that to me? Because, like, underneath that is really like, don't you understand
Mm,
from being your term racialized as Asian, your experience alone ought to warrant some sort of sisterhood with me.
hmm
But to hit that on me as other was really surprising. I had felt that otherness in the Asian church community, which is where this
Right.
occurs. But I was really, taken aback because I thought we had all experienced, and we probably had, that kind of racist remark from white people and
Mm,
other white kids. So I was pretty surprised. I think that has a lot to do with also like racialized sexism. And I think there's a lot happening with some sort of objectification or sexualization that's happening, but like otherness being the focus point, and that you don't belong, by the way, because you are mixed with the racist white other.
hmm.
That's how
Does
I
that
interpreted
and
it.
so seeing that happen in the Asian community and in the so-called white community, those things are happening in parallel. So you talked about being other kind of did you cross the places where you hold your racialized identities. D- It does that still occur now? Does that have the same impact on you now?
I'm curious, like, if there were other multiracial people here, I have a hunch that they would agree that even in the communities of color in which they occupy, there is a sense of privileged otherness based on skin tone and skin
Mm,
color,
mm,
that you have had access to white privilege of some kind. But I find that a lot of this is a bit of a lie and a farce, because what it's trying to do is make sure we're not curious and connected with one another and further divide and learn how to further divide. And we have to do the opposite. This is a learned behavior because of those systems of power. And frankly, patriarchy, especially like what Audre Lorde really coined, I think it's like white, capitalist, racist, patriarchal, there's so much baked into that experience that I think a lot of us have, because we're in between. We can kind of see it and slow it down and look at it and almost get used to being in the in between and being on the outskirts or completely outside of the belonging of those communities.
you said early in life in the book that you at a point when you were young, you always felt like you belonged. And
Mm.
then you said, or I think I can quote it, I knew I belonged in this world. And that was the young version of you. When did
Yeah.
that shift? Like, when did you start feeling like, wait a minute, maybe I don't?
I share that a daily experience of mine, especially growing up in central New Jersey in this predominantly white neighborhood, was the reminder that I was different and didn't belong in that question, like, what are you? And the follow-up question, where are your people from? Which I really kind of dissect what that feels like and what that question really means. And it's not curiosity. There's a difference between stating, I have a right to know and you need to tell me, and being a young kid, having mostly adults ask that question daily, was very much a stark realization that, oh, I don't belong.
Mm.
And people really want to know why I don't look the same. Why do I look racially ambiguous? Like, tell me what you are ethnically. I need to know, and you deserve to tell me.
Mm.
It's very strange. So that's probably where a lot of that came from. Plus the Asian brothers calling me
Yeah.
what we said,
Yeah.
where it's like,
Um,
oh, and then in Taipei, I'd say when people started always remarking about how I looked Western, and it was always about looking Western and that meaning more beautiful, which really made me feel like I didn't belong either
yeah,
back in
right.
Taiwan.
Yeah, that's the insidiousness of racialization, right? Is that they're looking at what they can categorize you as, but they don't necessarily dig into who you are.
Mm, that's right.
I think that distinction, I think we do that a little bit too much in the diversity and inclusion space too. We spend a lot of time on what people are and not as much time on who. And I think it
Hmm.
gets in the way of the level of connection and the feeling of belongingness that I think all of us long for. At least my friend and mentor, brother Howard Ross, talks about belonging a lot. And he talks about we all yearn for it, we long for it, we search for it. You went from feeling like you always belong to this place where people asking you, what are you? What are you categorized at? What can I ascribe to you? At some point, I imagine, and this is speculation, you start understanding who Ingrid, who sun shining on morning snow is. When did you start feeling like you belonged? At what point did that shift? And that could be around your relationships. It could be
Mm.
around your musical career, because I want to ask you about that. I also want to ask about the horses because I'm a big fan of horses. But tell me about that. It seems like the belongingness in the way that I kind of receive you now, you have a calmness to you. And people that I've experienced like that, they feel like they're supposed to be where they are right now. And to me,
Mm.
that would be a sense of belonging. So again, all speculation, but I'm curious.
Oh, I like that. I think you are very intuitive, and you probably aren't surprised that it's taken a lot of work and a lot of time and some amount of heartache and loss and identity crisis to remember who I am
Mm.
and look at the memory of tapestry of really being unapologetically me and choosing my truth and choosing the life that I want and open to receive and open to experience. I think I've always grown up to be a bit of a challenger and a rebel. It's made people uncomfortable. I'm also very kind and I can be overly accommodating. However, I think that ability to just say something that's the elephant in the room or to challenge in a way that I hope feels safe is me. It's
Yeah.
always been me. And I am somebody who fights for justice. Like I have that ingrained in me as well. When I know something's not right, I try to really figure out what is the origin of this and how can I be curious and to also make sure I'm not making assumptions because I find assumptions, people's beliefs can be incredibly powerful and harmful. So the stereotype and the bias and the shortcuts and all of that, if done mixed with a lack of humanity and a divisiveness, is a weapon. You know, racism is abusive. It's abuse. And it reminds me that we're in a place that we all need healing, which goes back to your question about and your inclination that I'm more grounded or calm. A lot of that is because I've done a lot of healing. I've made that a priority.
Was there a point where you just felt more you in your skin? Like, was it at a particular juncture? Was it when you really got clear on who you were in
Hmm.
terms of your sexual orientation, on who
Hmm.
you were and to who you wanted to love and who you wanted to love you? Was it kind of moving through some of the challenging experiences that you had through school when you were asked about
Mm,
what you are? At what point did you feel like you got to that space where you're like, yeah, I'm right here, right now, grounded in that
mm.
of who you are?
The most poetic answer to that is after my mother died. That was a really big, big moment of an unleashing of so much. It's hard to describe, but for sure, 3 years ago, before I wrote this book, when I lost my mom, it was an opening, a massive opening for the healing and for the calmness and the safety that I can generate, not that I'm seeking.
Mm,
No companies ever really made me feel fully safe, but they're not really structured to do that. So, how do I bring safety and create that as a foundational, non negotiable, this, that we start here and create that for other people? I'd also say another moment was after I had been married for a few years to my amazing wife, and I started getting more leadership roles in companies and felt very good in my skin as a female leader who could be outspoken and challenge things that I didn't believe in and that people would listen. That recognition and that seat changed a bit of like, oh, wow, more women need to be at these levels who are going to challenge the status
sure,
quo and have the
sure.
power to be able to make the change that's needed. But that's not always the course that is charted out for
Yeah.
us, unfortunately.
How did you? That's an interesting conversation because you said you came to that space in a way as a leader inside of organizations, and now you're a coach. So, what's the pathway to help people get to that place? We can say they could be so-called mixed race, they could
Mm,
be a woman, they could be a queer woman, they could be anybody who might have had an experience that made them feel other,
mm.
whatever, however they're racialized. What's the pathway that, given your embodied experience at this point, that you take to help people kind of get through that space where they can be like, yeah, if it comes at me, it's kind of like your mom, because your mom was just like, take no PS. And she just kept moving, but she didn't really
Mhm.
articulate it to you as much as she did later in life. How do you help people get there? Like, because that takes work, and it doesn't usually happen by yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Especially when you are a coach, you're making sure that somebody isn't alone on the journey. And a lot of these journeys need to be with other people. Like it's not good to even write a book alone, in my opinion. I had a
Right.
writing coach. So having your people all around you is important. I'd say it's really critical to be open to how the ego gets attached to things like a title, like the power that you get from a role, like any kind of learned supremacy that might be creeping up, and look at it and let it die in some ways. I had some of that happen in my career that was a bit forced. And I found myself kind of like at that bottom of the well that's in the book, but it was different. It was like my identity kind of crash coursed hard on the pavement. And I was like, wait a minute, why have I given this so much power? I have allowed it to have so much power in who I am and my identity. I'm not going to let that happen
Hmm.
again. And I have choice in that. My choice
Yeah.
is not to give it away so freely and to really detach myself from the luxuriousness of having those kinds of ego driven. And I'm not saying people are all in this way. This is my
Yeah.
take. But it's seductive. And I didn't want to be seduced by the ladder and climbing the ladder in that way that I was being seduced by it, allowing myself to be seduced by it. And I think if you catch yourself working really long hours, if you're watching and listening, losing the things that really matter to you, having burnout, not being able to communicate your boundaries, those are those are big signs. I
Yeah.
highly recommend that people listen and get curious and take care of themselves and do a check of like, I have one life to live and I'm allowed to choose a different path. I don't have to stay in this.
It's
Oh,
quite
that's pretty
seductive
powerful.
to take that other path, right? I've been in corporate. It's seductive and it's a game,
It
right?
is. It's shocking
And
how it is really
yeah,
and
it's a
truly a
game.
game.
And some people are really good at it. And
Oh,
you don't know
so
how
good.
it affects them. Some people maybe thrive on it. Other people, it
Oof,
completely overtakes them.
I've seen that.
What's one question you ask of somebody that helps them be able to see it? Whether they choose it or not, what question would you ask somebody that'll maybe helps them see where they're positioned, who they are, what they want to accept from others for what's destined for them versus what they want to choose and the path that they want to choose. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but what's that one kind of question that you're like, have you thought about
I have
what
two.
would you consider? Two. Two is
Yeah, I
great.
have two. One is kind of related to death. Actually, they're both related to death. One is at your funeral, what does the eulogy say if you continue on this path? What are they saying about you if they couldn't read your resume, but how you impacted people, how you spend time with those that you care about, how you gave back to the world? Like, what does that say? And if they're like, uh-oh, all I can think of is my resume. All I can think about is how I impacted the numbers, the company, this particular team, how I was land grabbing and empire building and played the game really well. If you start realizing, like, I'm not sure how people would be sharing anything outside of that, I think that's a big awareness. And the second related to death is if you knew today was the last day that you're going to live, what would you tell yourself at this juncture if you actually had more time? So, literally, what is your own idealized self, your wise self telling you? And I'd probably do a visualization around having the elder self give an object, which would provide some sort of helpful symbol of what they needed to know.
That's powerful. Thank you for that.
Thanks. That's a great question. It was a hard one. I
Um,
like it.
you were an equestrian. Everybody can actually have those things roll off of their out of their mouths. She has a horse tattoo, folks that are listening. It's beautiful. I actually noticed it before, but I was like, should I ask about that? I don't even think I did when we fought the first time. But that's a privileged sport.
Mm.
And your parents put the money in and sacrifice, but then Ingrid Hu Dahl, you start working at the stalls and you were doing stuff, and I can relate to this because my summers were spent baling hay, but
Mm.
I didn't do all the stuff that you did.
My child labor
The
years.
smelly stuff, right? And you were young, right?
Yes.
You have receipts. I saw pictures. How did that shape you? Because that's between both your equestrian experience and the physical work that you
Mm.
did to make sure that you could help cover some of the expenses that and really honor your parents' sacrifice to help you have animals to love and care for and to play with.
I gravitated to that very easily. It's interesting. I sometimes question my work ethic and drive a bit. Like, was it because I had child labor experiences working 12 hours a day
Ah,
and not get paid? Is that like part of why I have this approach? But I was always full of gratitude. I never took it for granted that I was able to ride. And I worked really hard and it was okay. I didn't have any emotions around it being unfair or God, like I never had those kinds of mental dialogues. It was, this is what you do to ride 3 horses a day, even if I'm training them, even if I'm breaking a habit of theirs so that other people can enjoy their ride. It didn't matter because what I wanted was just to be around horses and learn from horses. And I got to observe some interesting women who were tough, riders, trainers. It was a very scary sport too. The environment.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Y'all, she did some acrobatics off horses. So don't think that this was light riding, okay? So continue.
Okay. Yes, we did some really intense jumping and yes, it was high stakes. People did fall and hurt themselves pretty intensely. Horses hurt themselves pretty intensely, had to be put down. These are really hard memories, watching a horse get shot in the head. One of my favorite horses, and not really understanding why. Or a horse getting its leg like caught in the boards of its stall and it ripping its entire ligaments apart and it being shot in the head because it was not repairable. So you learn so much in that kind of environment of danger and a lot of love and care. And sometimes there's a lot of love in the labor, which might shock people. But, when you scrub the grime out of huge multi-gallon water buckets, the ultimate goal is to make sure that this horse can drink clean water. When I'm like heaving 50-pound bags of feed or barrels of hay, it's because this is going to nourish and feed these horses that I care about. So it's very much like pride in the care. And I probably, from that experience, learned to shape my acts of service as my love language, because that is my giving one is acts of service.
And I think there's what I heard and what I experienced from reading the book is it was a level of humility that comes to interact with animals like that, because horses are so intuitive and they just feel you. If they're not feeling you,
oh yeah, they'll let you know.
It can be actually quite dangerous.
Yes.
So I was impressed. I could go down that hole a lot longer, but I'm going to ask you a couple more questions before we close. How did your music career and your musical proclivities shape the Ingrid Hu Dahl we know today?
Well, I love the stage, Amri. I love it. I love being on it, all different shapes, sizes. I think connecting with an audience is wonderful. The humility part of it, the truth part of it, the performative, comedic parts of it. I think what I learned, though, which you read in the book, is that the spotlight of being an overly sexualized musician, even in the queer space, was not something that I enjoyed when it hit me that was something that I needed to divert from. Or I had to change the way that I enjoyed and stepped into that performance and costumery, which I did with a different band called Rad Pony, and then shift again and again. It's like this constant testing and evolve pivot. And now I'm at this place where I'm very much fully clothed. I don't have an instrument that is not just beyond my voice and my knowledge, but the stage is a home. And I don't think I would have gotten to a place where I feel that way had it not been from being on so many stages as a musician and also being pretty shy. There are moments where I was very, very badass and very much like confident, but there was definitely parts that were shy. Some of my first experiences performing were so terrifying or terrible. They didn't go well. And somebody found me under a piece of furniture, just kind of crying. It broke this sense that to show yourself in that way and to allow there to be a complete boatload of imperfection, especially as a woman, I had to go through that fire, if you will, to realize that imperfection and play comes from breaking that mold, that women can only be in a place where they're seen like that unless they are perfect, unless they're sexualized, unless they're just purely just being seen. And I have and had a lot of things to say. And so voice and positionality, but playfulness and open vulnerability and connection became more about who I really jive with. This is who I am. And can I be fierce and sassy and flirtatious when I feel like it? Sure, that's still me too.
That's you too, but it's your choice.
Right.
It's not something that somebody tries to ascribe to you, or you must do it like this, or you must perform as I desire versus this is who I am, and I'm going to let that come out naturally.
That's right.
Got it. Now, probably not good to go down this path of a deep question at the end of our conversation, but I did mention, and you did mention in the book, Adrian Piper. If those of you who are not familiar with
Oh,
Adrian Piper, she's still living, and she's probably one of the most, I would say, one of the most profound artists and philosophers of the 21st century. She's absolutely amazing. She happens to be a resident of Berlin. She is celibate. She is a vegan or vegetarian, and she's a yogi. I think
mm,
she's around in her mid 70s now. But I've been just learning about her over the past probably 4 or 5 years. And when I first read about her, the reason that I gravitated to her because she had retired from race.
mm,
She actually declared, "I've retired." Retired from race, and some of her art reflected that. And she shared with the writer Thomas Chatterton Williams once that she stays in Berlin because, quote, she never would have found the freedom back home to exist outside of the black and white, or in your case, the non-white, white, Asian, white binary. Have you ever thought about or had conversations about with other mixed racialized people about what situating yourself outside of that binary could look like? You ever thought about it? I'm asking for me primarily because I'm getting to the point that I want to situate myself outside of that binary.
mm,
And when I was in the US a couple weeks ago, I was like, whoa, that's all there is for most
mm,
people. And I came back anxious,
yeah.
and I haven't felt that I felt it at the beginning of the year because, everybody was feeling it, but it's still going on in the US. But I felt, whoa, I don't particularly like it. It's taken me a few days since I've been back to
Mm,
Switzerland. And I acknowledge it's a privilege for me to be able to come back here and even enter into that space for where I am and able to get away from that binary notion. But have you ever thought about what it would be like to situate yourself outside of the racial binaries?
yeah, I would say that even in California, especially in the Bay Area, it is like a different country
Mm,
from New Jersey. It's a struggle going back to New Jersey. Yet I go quarterly to be with my dad and brother and family. And New York just has a different experience for me. But so even within the country itself, it's like interesting. I love going to Europe and Asia. I think what's so beautiful is that a lot of people don't assume I'm fully different. They're assume that I must live there.
mm.
Like I'm a global citizen because of my difference. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to speak to you in French or Spanish because I
Mhm.
assume that you're here and you seem kind. So can you give me directions? And the same thing
To
happens to
that
my
point, my
wife.
friend Laura would consider herself racialized as Black or African American. You two could be sisters,
I
without a
love
doubt,
that. I
right?
love that. I want to be her sister. I know it.
I have to tell her about you.
Yeah, please. But I think that kind of global citizen feeling and experience is outside of the US for sure. And I do really love that. And my wife and I do think about Spain as a potential place to relocate because, there's a lot going on in this country and it's obsessed with race and racism and supremacy and distinction of who is and who belongs and who doesn't and what's right and what's wrong. And that's not to say that globally there isn't racism. Oh my
Right.
God, there's all the
Right, right.
things that
Absolutely.
Audre Lorde, right, said. But going back to Adrian Piper, who I absolutely love, who is my favorite artist in the feminist art history movement. So she was considered part of that.
Mhm.
She was the only one who was making this kind of public art besides like Barbara Kruger and
Right.
Carrie Mae Weems that was also talking about being in this binary and challenging racial interactions around otherness. Like her piece Cornered that I talk about in the book was so powerful in the way she addresses the viewer from this position that she shows us. She feels cornered in
Yeah.
this way. My one regret, I don't have a lot of regrets, Omri, but my one regret, and it's related to Adrian Piper, is that I had this window opportunity when I was finishing my thesis about her for undergrad to give her a copy through her assistant at the time. So this would have been 2002. And I just got like cold feet. I got scared that this person I admired so much would read it and be like, what the hell? This lady doesn't know what she's talking about. But I regretted because I bet there would have been a kinship and a potential opening in a sisterhood because I think I did probably see her in a way that would have felt connective
See,
beyond this
she's
timeline or
just
something.
anything I read about her, she's exacting, but she's gracious.
Mm.
And so I imagine you are correct. So I'm going to wrap us up. This has been delightful,
I loved
and
it.
I appreciate it. Is there anything I should have asked that I didn't, Ingrid?
No, I do know though, I mentioned a little bit about laws, and I think it's just for viewers and listeners out there, you don't have to experience loss to have this big opening, but it really does create that like, whoa. And if you or somebody you know are going through loss, I encourage you all to just embrace the journey because it's a journey and not all of it's bad. There's some things that are powerfully like eye-opening, awestruck, and can create things like this book, right? Your story to come out into the world. Who knows? So the sky's the limit, one life to live. No, not question that you didn't ask, but perhaps on me to have shared a bit more about that experience.
Ingrid Hu Dahl, such a delight. I hope everybody that's listening had at least half of the experience that I've had today. And folks, make it a great day. I hope this was helpful and uplifting. Peace. If you are committed or simply a little bit curious about how to make DEI accessible to everyone, actionable, that is, unambiguously prioritized and sustainable, aligned with personal and organizational purpose, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day. Peace.